It is the summer of 1944, somewhere in the bocage of Normandy. The hedgerows are dense and ancient, pressing in from both sides of the narrow lane like walls of a green labyrinth. A German panzer commander scans the tree line from his cupola, engine idling, his crew alert but unhurried. He has been told the British armour in this sector is slow. He has been told it poses little threat to a well-positioned Panzer IV. He has been told, in essence, not to worry. Then something moves at the far end of the lane, something squat and purposeful, grinding forward on wide tracks at no great speed. The German commander raises his binoculars. He recognizes the silhouette. A Churchill. He almost laughs. The Churchill infantry tank, with its lumbering gait and its reputation for mechanical unreliability, has become something of a standing joke among panzer crews in the early years of the war. It is slow. It is ungainly. And yet, something is different about this one. The barrel is wrong, too long, too thick. It does not look like any Churchill he has seen before. And it is already pointing directly at him. The round that follows travels roughly 880 meters per second. It does not miss. This is the story of the Churchill AVRE, the Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers, and its companion, the Churchill Crocodile. Two machines built on a chassis the Germans had written off, reimagined with a ruthlessness and ingenuity that would alter the course of operations across northwest Europe. But to understand why these vehicles existed at all, you must first understand the catastrophe that made them necessary. On August 19, 1942, nearly 5,000 Canadian soldiers and 1,000 British commandos landed on the beaches of Dieppe in northern France. The operation, known as Operation Jubilee, was intended as a large-scale raid, a test of Allied capability to seize and hold a heavily defended port. What followed was one of the most disastrous amphibious assaults of the entire war. Within hours, roughly 3,000 men had been killed, wounded, or captured. The beaches became killing grounds. The Churchill tanks that had been landed to support the infantry were largely immobilized on the shingle, unable to climb the sea wall, unable to breach the wire, unable to silence the concrete gun emplacements that poured fire onto the exposed men below. The lessons of Dieppe were brutal and unambiguous. Conventional tanks, however well armoured, could not be expected to overcome the specific engineering obstacles of a defended coastline or a fortified town. What was needed was something different. Armoured vehicles capable of breaching walls, destroying bunkers at close range, cutting through wire entanglements, laying bridges over ditches, and clearing minefields. In short, what was needed was a way to give combat engineers the protection they required to do their extraordinarily dangerous work in the face of direct enemy fire. The problem was acute. A standard engineer clearing a minefield or placing demolition charges against a concrete emplacement was among the most exposed men on any battlefield. The work demanded patience and precision under conditions that made both almost impossible. Machine gun fire, mortar rounds, snipers. All of these made the engineer's task not merely difficult, but suicidal in open ground. Existing armoured support could provide covering fire, but it could not place the charges. It could not breach the obstacle. Only a man with his hands could do that, and a man with his hands was a man without armour. The solution that emerged from the combined thinking of the War Office, the Royal Engineers, and the Tank Directorate in late 1942 and throughout 1943 was both elegant and extreme. Rather than attempting to protect the engineer in the open, they would bring the engineering capability inside the armour itself. The result was a family of specialised armoured vehicles that Major General Sir Percy Hobart commanding the 79th Armoured Division, would develop, organize, and deploy with a ferocious determination. These machines became collectively known as Hobart's Funnies, and the Churchill was at the heart of them. The Churchill tank, built by Vauxhall Motors at Luton and by a network of contractors across Britain, had first entered service in 1941. It was not a beloved machine in those early days. Powered by a 350 horsepower Bedford twin-six engine, it managed roughly 24 kilometers per hour, 50 miles per hour, on roads, a pace that would have embarrassed a determined cyclist going uphill. It weighed approximately 40 tons in its Mark IV configuration. Its main armament, a 75mm QF gun, was adequate but not exceptional. Critics were numerous and vocal. What the Churchill possessed, however, was armour. Lots of it. The frontal plate on the Churchill Mark VII reached 152mm, roughly 6 inches of hardened steel, comparable in thickness to the hull of a small vessel. This was armour that could absorb punishment that would have stopped lighter vehicles in their tracks. And it was this quality, combined with the Churchill's remarkably low ground pressure from its wide, long tracks, that made it ideal for conversion. The chassis could carry weight that other tanks could not. It could cross soft ground that others would have bogged in. It could take hits that would have killed lesser machines. The Churchill AVRE, Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers, replaced the standard main gun with a petard mortar. This weapon fired what engineers called the flying dustbin, a 26-pound spigot bomb packed with 28 pounds of high explosive. The petard had a maximum range of roughly 80 meters, which meant the crew had to drive to within the length of a football pitch of whatever they intended to destroy. The bomb itself, when it detonated against a concrete emplacement, generated a force sufficient to breach walls up to 2.4 meters, 8 feet thick. The concussive effect inside a bunker was, according to contemporary accounts, total. Nothing survived a direct hit at close range. Reloading the petard required the co-driver to open a hatch in the front of the hull, reach outside the armour entirely, and manually load the next round into the spigot from outside the vehicle. This, in a combat zone, required what can only be described as a particular kind of nerve. The AVRE also carried fascines, enormous bundles of chestwood or steel pipe, roughly 1.8 meters in diameter, 6 feet, and up to 3.6 meters, 12 feet long, which could be dropped into anti-tank ditches to create crossings. Other variants carried small box girder bridges or carpet-laying devices to help vehicles cross soft sand, or bobbin rollers to lay matting across soft ground. The Churchill had become, in effect, a mobile engineering workshop with armour thick enough to drive through a firestorm. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. It allows us to keep making these stories available. The Churchill Crocodile was something altogether more visceral. Developed in parallel with the AVRE, the Crocodile replaced the hull machine gun with a flame projector capable of firing a sustained stream of burning fuel, a mixture of thickened petroleum, to a range of approximately 110 meters, 360 feet. The fuel was carried in an armoured trailer towed behind the tank, holding roughly 1,800 litres, 400 gallons, sufficient for approximately 81-second bursts. The trailer connected to the tank by an armoured pipe running under the hull. When the Crocodile fired, the burning fuel did not simply engulf the target. It flowed. It found gaps in emplacements, poured through loopholes, ran down the steps of bunker entrances, against defended positions that could otherwise only be silenced by direct assault. The Crocodile represented something that transcended tactical effectiveness. It was psychological annihilation. The AVRE and the Crocodile were first deployed in earnest on June 6, 1944. The invasion of Normandy at Sword, Juno, and Gold Beaches. The British and Canadian landings that morning were spearheaded by specialized armour in a way that the American landings at Omaha emphatically were not. General Omar Bradley had declined the offer of Hobart's Funnies for the American sector, accepting only the DD swimming tanks. The consequences were measured in the casualty figures. British and Canadian beaches saw roughly 2,500 killed and wounded on D-Day. Omaha Beach alone accounted for approximately 2,000 American casualties in a sector not significantly more heavily defended. At La Riviere on Gold Beach, Churchill AVRES breached the seawall within minutes of landing, allowing infantry to pour through before German defenders had time to reorganize. At Courseulles on Juno Beach, a Crocodile engaged a concrete casemate that had been holding up the advance for over 2 hours. The assault had cost dozens of lives. The Crocodile ended it in seconds. Precise records from individual actions are fragmentary. The fog of war, the chaos of the landing, and subsequent classification of some operational reports have left gaps in the documentary record. But the broad picture from multiple accounts and unit war diaries is consistent. Where the specialized armour of the 79th Armoured Division was present, obstacles that would otherwise have taken hours and hundreds of casualties to overcome were neutralized in minutes. The Germans had no direct equivalent. The Wehrmacht had experimented with armoured engineer vehicles, and the Sturmtiger, a tank mounting a 380mm rocket mortar, was conceptually similar to the AVRE in its purpose of delivering very heavy munitions at close range. But the Sturmtiger was enormous, mechanically complex, and produced in tiny numbers. Approximately 18 were built in total. It was a weapon designed in response to urban warfare on the Eastern Front, not the fluid combined arms battles of Northwest Europe, and its limitations in mobility and production numbers meant it never achieved the systematic deployment that Hobart managed with the Churchill variants. The Americans, for their part, developed their own tank-mounted flamethrowers, notably the M4 Sherman-based Satan and later the Zippo. But these were deployed primarily in the Pacific Theater, where cave and bunker warfare demanded similar solutions. In the European theater, the Americans relied more heavily on portable flamethrowers carried by infantry, which required the operator to approach the target on foot. The Churchill Crocodile's ability to deliver flame from within armour at greater range with a substantially larger fuel reserve represented a meaningful operational advantage that American forces in Europe recognized but were unable to replicate in equivalent numbers before the war's end. The psychological impact of the Crocodile on German defenders deserves particular emphasis. It became known among Allied planners that the mere presence of crocodiles in a sector sometimes prompted surrender from otherwise determined defenders. German soldiers who had held positions against artillery, against infantry assault, against conventional armour, would emerge with hands raised when they heard that flame tanks were approaching. Several accounts from prisoners of war, collected in the months after D-Day and during the subsequent campaign across Northwest Europe, describe the Crocodile not as a military threat, but as something outside the normal calculus of combat. It was not a weapon against which training or courage offered meaningful protection. Records from the 79th Armoured Division suggest that in several engagements during the Rhineland campaign of early 1945, fortified positions fell without the Crocodile needing to fire a single burst, its presence alone achieving what hours of conventional assault had not. The Churchill AVRE continued in service with the British Army long after the Second World War ended, eventually being replaced by the Centurion AVRE in the 1960s. The principles it established, armoured vehicles carrying specialised engineering equipment into direct combat, remain central to modern military engineering doctrine. The 77th Armoured Engineer Regiment, the direct descendant of the units that operated Hobart's Funnies, continues to serve today. Surviving Churchill AVR. It can be seen at the Tank Museum at Bovington in Dorset, where one example, hull number T68875, sits in the main hall restored to operational condition. A Churchill Crocodile, complete with its towed fuel trailer, is also preserved at Bovington, its flame projector pointed at a future no one any longer expects it to illuminate. Return now to that lane in Normandy, to the German Panzer commander in his cupola, raising his binoculars at the slow, ungainly machine grinding towards him. He has been told the Churchill is not a threat. He has been told correctly about the standard Churchill, about the vehicle the War Office had been quietly embarrassed by in 1941 and 1942, about the tank that the Panzer crews had seen at Dieppe and dismissed. He has not been told about what Hobart's engineers did to it. He has not been told about the petard, or the flying dustbin, or the flame projector that can reach him from 100 meters away and find every gap in his armour. He has not been told that the machine in front of him is not, in any meaningful sense, the same vehicle it once was. That the slow, lumbering Churchill he expected to find has been given teeth that his own tank cannot match at close range. The Germans looked at the Churchill and saw a slow tank. The British looked at the Churchill and saw a platform, a foundation upon which to build something the enemy would never anticipate, because the enemy had already decided the Churchill did not matter. That was, as it turned out, a very costly assumption. The tank the Germans ignored became the tank that cleared the beaches, breached the walls, silenced the bunkers, and drove the flame that broke the defenders, who would not otherwise break. It was slow. It was ugly. It was built on a chassis most people had written off, and it hunted down every single one.